Hello, I'm speaking to you this time from the shadows of the British Houses of Parliament in London. I've spent days at a time here hosting breaking news coverage on big votes, state occasions and, sadly, terror attacks. Viewers tune in to find out what's going on, and I tell them what I can, but I'm often waiting on the information myself. I was coaching a group of Swedish TV anchors recently, and they asked me how I handle breaking news, and I had to think really hard about that because the techniques I fall back on have become second nature to me now. I remember starting out in the business though, and living in fear of being called into the studio to answer questions on a subject that I wasn't an expert in. When I eventually took the plunge, I realised I usually knew more than I thought, and ultimately it was just a conversation, and we have those all the time. So here's my advice on going into a presentation cold. First of all, stick to what you know. That sounds pretty obvious, but it's tempting to speculate or worse, lie when you feel you're out of your depth. You lose your clout as soon as you lose your honesty, and whoever's in front of you in the audience will sense that straight away. In my line of work, the big challenge is always the rumour and conspiracy that bubbles up on social media during a major news event. I've lost count of the number of times that a loud bang, for example, has been misinterpreted online as an explosion and then shared as a bomb or even a terror attack. It usually turns out to be something much more innocuous. For example, in November 2017, Oxford Circus Underground Station and the area around it in London went into lockdown. Someone had reported gunfire. There was a stampede, people got hurt and others took refuge in shops. Armed police even responded as if it was a terror attack, but that's what they do automatically in these situations now. Then a pop star, Ollie Murs, tweeted, "Everyone get out of Selfridges now! Gunshots! I'm inside!" Even the Daily Mail tweeted an article with the headline, "Gunshots fired as armed police officers surround Oxford Circus station after lorry ploughs into pedestrians." But there was no lorry. There was no gunfire. There had been an altercation, as the police put it, on one of the platforms, and things just escalated from there. The Mail later retracted the story and they apologised for it. Once we do know, though, that a major incident is definitely underway, I'll usually go to air with what information we have. You can probably apply my strategy here to any situation where you're worried about drying up. I simply take what I know, I break it down into its parts, expand on each one of them, and then switch between them. That way I can flesh things out for as long as I need to. Imagine I was given one line of information. The Prime Minister of Cloutland has been replaced. I would circle the key words there, which in this case would be Prime Minister, Cloutland and replaced. I'll probably start with Cloutland and describe where it is, how many people live there, what it looks like, anything really that can give the story some context. Then I'd move on to Prime Minister. Who is it? How long have they been in office? And how successful have they been? Is their departure a surprise? I'm essentially going as deep as I can into what I know to be true, and I draw on my expertise and experience. Then I'd move on to replaced. Who's the most likely replacement? How are prime ministers appointed in that country? Once I've exhausted everything I know, I'd switch back to one of the other elements, and that in itself prompts me to think about something fresh to say, or at least a fresh way of saying it. If I feel like I'm repeating myself at any point, I'm reminded that people might just be tuning in, and I'll point that out on air too, so I include everyone. Now, as new information comes in, I'll flesh out my talking points and elements and add new ones too. If it turns out that the Prime Minister's been incapacitated in some way, the priority then becomes finding out what happened to them and how they're doing as well. I use those talking points to pivot the conversation essentially. It can't be a one-way interaction. I have to engage the audience by explaining what I'm doing to get more information. That might mean saying that we're waiting for our reporters to arrive at the scene or that a press conference is imminent. If we need additional expertise even, I'll explain that we're bringing that in by way of a guest. It has to feel like we're discovering the answers together. Now, it's always much more constructive when you're struggling in a presentation to explain what you're doing to find the answer rather than closing the conversation down by saying you just haven't got one. In my job, the question is usually what's going on, but it could be any question really in your particular circumstance. Someone once described anchoring to me as walking along a tightrope with the rope falling down behind you, in which case breaking news is doing it blindfolded. It's the coalface of presentation, but once you've been there a few times and actually touched it, you realise it's not as scary as you think, and crucially, there's always a way out. If you're worried about presenting, then all I can say is hiding isn't really the answer. Just get out there and face your fear, and you'll realise that, like most skills, it just takes practice.